Story 1. If they got rid of the federal level of the Department of Education, why would they go out of their way to replace it with anything? If they were going to replace it with something, then there is no reason to eliminate the current department. Story 2-1. The lunch program is not run by the Department of Education. Free and reduced lunch will not be affected at all. The individualized education and special education program will be moved into health and human services. Federal Pell Grants and Perkins loans will be moved to the Treasury. The Civil Rights Division will move into the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. Everything else will be returned to the individual states as it was before the Department of Education. Story 3. Just like in Canada, education is seen as a provincial jurisdiction, and it is frowned upon for the federal government to get involved. Maybe the biggest problem is transitioning too quickly from one system to another. Story 4. Nothing. The Department of Education's main function is distributing federal funding to public schools nationwide. Most likely, if they do succeed in closing the department entirely without action from Congress, legally dubious since Congress established it by law to start with, that money will simply be siphoned away in tax cuts to the rich or for pet projects like the State Department's $400 million Tesla order. Story 5. Republicans have wanted to abolish it for decades. There would be no replacement. They want any funding to go to parents so they can pay for charter schools, which are largely unregulated private institutions that will be free to teach children in such a way to keep them good little Republicans without any form of critical thinking. Story 6. The same thing happened in Louisiana after Hurricane Katrina. A bunch of private and charter schools will open up, and education will become inaccessible for the vast majority. Then they can use all the broke, uneducated people to do manual labor jobs for less money. They want people smart enough to operate the machines but not aware enough to realize they are being exploited. Story 7. So we do not know what we do not know. And catastrophizing is rampant now. That said, I will be uncharitable for a moment. One major issue at play is that even if a clean transition happens, the unqualified sycophantic television stars and central casting ankle-biters running the show at the federal level will find a way to mismanage the tiniest thing in ways nobody thought possible. Think things are inefficient now? Do not make me laugh. Never mind the fact that all sorts of welfare and socialist Department of Education initiatives and efforts that give a scrap of benefit to anyone who is not the right demographic will not transition anywhere. They will simply disappear, and the smooth-brained lizards hoping for an extra 3 cents on their tax refund will cheer. And certainly do not discard the fact that Elon Musk's unelected team of babyface goons will be combing through all of your personal information as all of this happens. Story 8. It's important before saying what would replace it to know what it actually does. Despite what many conservatives would like you to think, it does not dictate curriculum. That has always been up to the states. What it does do is manage the dispersal of federally backed student loans and grants and enforce rules around education rights. So, if your school isn't providing services for your dyslexic child, they are there to make things right. So, with that in mind, the management of loans and grants would likely pass on to somebody else. They may try to limit or eliminate the grants, as they have been trying unsuccessfully to do in recent weeks. The loans are still administered by a loan servicer, so despite the wishes of people on Reddit, this would not nullify those, and you would still need to pay them back. Not giving out new loans would be political suicide, so I doubt those are going anywhere either. As far as enforcing rights, that would be left up to the states, which is troublesome because you could have crimson-colored states that want to do away with those protections. Story 9. I really hope it does not. I am a teacher, and while the American education system definitely does not work for everyone, we need standards. It is bad enough certain southern states are banning history books and completely ignoring separation of church and state in schools. Story 10. Nothing replaces it because the responsibility of education would fall entirely on the states. Each state already has its own Department of Education. Interestingly, this is how it works in Canada, where each province runs education independently, and the federal government does not have a department in charge. The federal government in Canada still distributes funds to provinces but is generally hands-off in education. Through the provinces, public education is usually regarded as higher quality than the United States and has better funding schemes to ensure schools in poor neighborhoods do not fall behind. So, It is possible to change the system without it collapsing. Story 11. States exist. There is a hierarchical structure in the United States. If the federal government does not do something, the states have the legal authority to do it and the responsibility to fund it. Story 12. The same thing that was in its place before it was created. It has only existed since 1979, and the United States has done a lot since its creation. It will go back to the states. Story 13. I don't think there are any plans for anything to replace it. Maybe some people think they can get their children educated on the internet, which I don't think is a good idea for kindergarten through 12th grade. Story 14. Nothing. Everything they are abolishing will be gone. They do not care about anything that helps ordinary citizens. They only care about getting richer. Story 15. The Republican Party has been opposed to public education for the last half-century or more. They don't want a replacement, and they feel that education harms their agenda. This was all on a journey to become the fascist party of the United States. Fascism has to have some key elements for it to manifest. The first is the most obvious, and that is authoritarianism. We can definitely put a check in that box for the Republican Party. The second item is that they have to control the narrative of education. This is why the Republican Party has been working night and day to tear down public education. Less education of the general population equals less critical thinking. The same goes for the religious schools they keep pushing. Not only are you not getting a secular education for critical thinking, but you are also being indoctrinated into a way of thinking that cannot be proven or disproven. This makes it so that you can be easily fed various lines of dogma that can be used to manipulate at will. If you think this is false, just look at what every fascist nation has done with religion. If you think they got rid of religion, they did not. They merely replaced it with nationalism. There is a strong reason that theocracies operate the way they do. It works, but not in a good and wholesome way. A third item is having an alternate reality. The fascist government lies. It lies a lot. It lies so much that you begin to question reality more and more. These lies are typically used to further its goal of control. However, they are also used as a type of distraction and overwhelming tactic. You are so busy trying to filter through the falsehoods that you are distracted a lot and often. While this is happening, the government does something else that you are in too much disbelief, apathetic, or mentally exhausted to really mount a good response. The alternate reality also works like the second item above. A fourth item that seems to always be present. The fascist government will typically glorify the past. This one is super obvious with the current situation in the United States. Make America great again. Anyone? This glorification of the past is typically misleading and is also an attempt to rewrite history. The fascist has to show that no wrong has ever been done by their nation's history, and that everything was circumstance or done out of pure innocence. Just like how the Republican Party quite frequently tries to find ways around slavery in the United States. God forbid anyone ever learn from their mistakes. The last item I will mention. Fascist governments must have an enemy at all times. Usually, it is multiple enemies. Most fascist governments will have a racial enemy, but that isn't always the case. Religion definitely works. Social status is a big one. Different ethnicities. How about the radical left? I can go on with this, but I digress. I think you get the point. The above is what a good education and paying attention can get you. This is why they want to get rid of it as much as they can. Story 16. Nothing. The super rich people now in charge don't want working class kids to get educated. They want them to grow up ignorant, as wage slaves, and have to work until they die penniless and in debt. Listen to Tennessee Ernie Ford's song, 16 Tons. Find out about the reality of a coal mine company town back in those days. That is the great America the super rich want to bring back to reality again. Story 17. Something substantially worse. State-level education. The Earth is 6,000 years old. Evolution is false. We are magically animated beings created by God. The universe? We're the center of it, and it's also only 6,000 years old. Dinosaurs? Never existed, or the bones were placed there deceitfully, or they existed and were left behind by the flood. Sick? Pray. Prayer works better than any medicine which is considered evil. Girls? They don't need education. It's better for them to stay home and have children. Children with special needs? They just need more discipline. Teach them through correction how much they are loved. Science? It's deceptive, and staying away from it brings you closer to God. Story 18. The state's education departments, just like it was before 1980. Two things worth noting. First, by many measures, educational outcomes were higher then, though I actually don't think that really is a causal link. And second, not having a Department of Education doesn't stop Congress from making education laws. It just means there's no department heading the whole thing. Story 19. Nothing at the federal level. That is the entire point. The Constitution delineates specifically the duties of the federal government. Everything else is left to the states. Education is not mentioned, so it reverts to local control by each state. Story 20. States. Same as it was prior to 1970. The push is to make each state more or less responsible for itself. This works for states that have a high gross domestic product, like California, for example, but not so well for states like Mississippi. Story 21. Jimmy Carter created the Department of Education to increase the reading scores of our country's kids. 50 years later, the same disparities still exist. It's time to stop doing the same. An unacceptable percentage of our kids can't even read. Apparently, those who continue to support the Department of Education can't read either. Story 22. Education has always been run by the states. In fact, over 50% of state-level spending is for education. It is unclear how much each state is dependent on funding from the Federal Department of Education, though. Story 23. I doubt they want anything to replace it, maybe a way for private schools to receive funds. They want a dumb population because a dumb population is easily controlled. Story 24. Georgia Department of Education. What will happen is that states will educate their children differently, and states like Oregon, which have abolished some requirements for math and English, will see their students fall behind. Meanwhile, other states that consistently perform well will thrive and receive the best opportunities. Without quotas, some out-of-state institutions may limit the number of students from particular states that show poor performance. Story 25. Well, would you rather have it or have Linda McMahon running it? Both have serious downsides. Seriously, I don't think there is really any precedent for the unilateral destruction of so many departments. Depending on Congress, they could aggregate under another department or just exist as a shell of its former self while the rest is handled by the states. Who knows in this climate? Story 26. Whether or not the Department of Education is necessary, dismantling it and not filling in the void with anything at all is going to lead to problems across the country in pretty much every classroom. You don't solve problems by nuking them. Story 27. The Department of Education does not just universally run the education of the United States. That's mostly left up to states. The Department of Education does a lot of work to try and tie it together. They set standards, provide funding for some things, and provide oversight for programs. The Department of Education going away is not the end of education in the United States, and for the average kid, they would not notice much of a difference. But it's still pretty significant. To put it as simply as possible, there are three major aspects that the Department of Education provides that would see a major impact and potentially disappear: protections and funding for special needs students and their programs, oversight on how federal education funding is spent, and funding for higher education through student loans. However, all existing loans would not be forgiven, and other departments would just handle collections. Story 28. Allegedly, the states will likely involve huge increases in taxes, assuming the states care. With any luck, it will also cause legislative action against universities that excessively raise prices, which includes pretty much every non-community college, and even then, some community colleges. But I doubt it. I feel like they will double down and increase costs on students, arguing, "We have to because of less income." Story 29. It goes to the states. The states that complain the most about federal taxes are usually the ones that benefit the most from them, and they will suffer the most. States like Massachusetts will thrive. Story 30. If you are asking about current administration policy, then nothing. It will be private schools. Your kids will be as smart as you can afford. Considering our education system is what built American excellence. These are dark days. Story 31. Nothing, they have no plans on actually improving the system. That's part of the plan, though. Educated people are less likely to fall for propaganda such as Joe Biden is responsible for the world's economy, or immigrants are more dangerous than a United States citizen, or getting rid of immigrants will save us money, or tariffs will help the economy, or January 6th was peaceful, etc. Edit, or they're eating the dogs. You think that would work on a remotely intelligent population? Story 32. Each state has to do its own thing. The ignorant states become more ignorant. The intelligent states band together to try to achieve cost savings among like-minded allies. These states eventually realize that they're tired of both being told what to do by uninformed individuals and also being expected to pay for it. The organization originally formed to serve as a replacement Department of Education eventually forms the nucleus for those states to break away from those holding them back. The United States empire finally officially falls. The states left behind languish in poverty, while those who left are largely able to manage, although they are no longer close to being a superpower.